Tanse, I'm Wolastoqey. Welcome to APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. A Mi'kmaq politician made history this week. Jaime Battiste announced he is running for the leadership of the Liberal Party. And if he were to win, he'd become the first Indigenous Prime Minister of Canada. Angel Moore has more with this story.
Today, I'm grateful to announce that I've submitted my application and all of the requirements to run for the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada and to be the first Indigenous person ever to run for the Prime Minister of Canada.
Jaime Battiste beat a deadline on Thursday as he submitted the required 300 registered Liberal signatures along with a $50,000 deposit. With the support of Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey leaders from the Atlantic region, Chief Leroy Denny of the Eskasoni First Nation hosted the event. He says Battiste has the experience to lead the country.
For his background, his education in law, and as a parliamentary secretary, he has the tools, he has everything in his toolbox to make sure that he can also run this country like any other party leaders that are running for the bid, which I respect them all.
Chief Terry Paul of the Membertou First Nation says Battiste can ensure Indigenous rights will be heard at the federal level.
We have certain rights here, and of course, Jaime has the mind of working with the whole country, which is fantastic, and that should be, running for Prime Minister. But my support comes from our need to have our rights recognized by the federal government.
Battiste is from the Eskasoni First Nation, and it's not the first time he's made history. He is the first Mi'kmaq elected to Parliament in 2019, representing a federal riding in Cape Breton. Battiste says if elected Prime Minister, he will work to ensure key legislations will move forward.
And I think that there are fundamental pieces, not just to Indigenous communities, like the ability to have their own watersheds protected, the ability to have child and family services money flow to our communities, that we just can't afford to go to a community in March. We need to give ourselves the ability to a little bit to move forward on these and get to royal assent, because they're going to be crucial to so many people across this country.
Battiste is still fundraising as he needs to submit $350,000 in 4 installments between January 23rd and February 17th. A new leader will be chosen March 9th. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
A $50 million class action lawsuit has been filed in Alberta, alleging First Nation children sent to the École Notre Dame school in the town of Bonnyville were victims of physical, mental, and sexual abuse. The suit was filed in 2019. A judge in Bonnyville certified the case earlier this week. The lawsuit says the abuse happened in the Catholic school after the day school in the nearby Cahuan Cree Nation shut down in 1964. The governments of Canada and Alberta and the Lakeland Catholic Separate School Division and the Diocese of St. Paul have all been named as defendants. The class action will include students who attended École Notre Dame in Bonnyville between September 1st, 1966 and June 28th, 1974. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's Call to Action 81 is one more step closer to being fulfilled. On Thursday, the National Capital Commission in Ottawa announced it has chosen a location for a Indian residential school national monument that will one day be located on Parliament Hill. The monument honoring Indigenous residential school survivors will be located on the western terrace of Parliament Hill, just west of Mackenzie Tower, near the West Block, overlooking the Ottawa River. Survivors had a say in the location, and the statue of Sir Robert Borden, Canada's 8th Prime Minister, will have to be relocated. The monument has a $20 million price tag, and the entire process will be guided by Indigenous values. Construction is set to take place in 2027, with an unveiling expected in 2028. A First Nations leader in Manitoba who has been on leave following a bar fight in Ottawa is back on the job. In a post on social media, the Southern Chiefs organization in Manitoba has welcomed back its Grand Chief Jerry Daniels after what they're calling a recent health leave. In the statement, the SCO said they were excited to welcome Jerry Daniels back. SCO says a private chiefs meeting was held earlier this month and that Grand Chief Jerry Daniels has the support of the Southern First Nation chiefs. They also thanked Lake Manitoba Chief Cornell McLean, who stepped in as acting SCO Grand Chief. Last December, Daniels was sent to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries after a bar fight in Ottawa's Byward Market, just hours before the opening of the Assembly of First Nations winter gathering. Ottawa police have since closed its investigation into the matter and said no charges would be laid unless new information comes to light. Daniels apologized for that night and said he had a problem with alcohol. The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs says they're very concerned about a 2024 Stats Canada survey on Indigenous people that highlights what they call the devastating impact of the rising cost of living. Stats Canada says close to half of First Nations people living off reserve and Métis people 15 and older reported that it was difficult or very difficult to meet their financial needs for transportation, housing, food, clothing, and other expenses. For the Inuit, that stat is more than half at 54%. Indigenous people were surveyed between August and September of last year. AMC's acting Grand Chief Betsy Kennedy calls for urgent action from all levels of government to address the growing inequities and adds that Indigenous people should never have to choose between feeding their families and securing shelter. U.S. President Donald Trump wasted no time this week in confirming his plan to implement a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican trade goods. APTN's Tina House has reaction from British Columbia.
At President Trump's inaugural speech, he confirmed he will tariff foreign countries.
Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our treasury.
Reaction was swift even before the Trump inauguration.
Our country is under direct threat by the President-elect of the United States. It is a declaration of economic war, in my opinion.
Werner Antweiler is a professor of economics at the Sauder School of Business at the University of British Columbia. He explains what these tariffs mean.
It would be a very, very difficult situation for the Canadian economy if these tariffs go ahead, because not only would we see the tariffs in the U.S., but we would also need to respond with retaliatory measures, which also will hurt our Canadian economy. But in that situation, there will be significant pain all across, but not only here in Canada, because tariffs are paid for by the U.S. consumers and U.S. businesses that are importing Canadian intermediate goods.
Grand Chief Stuart Phillips says what President Trump is doing is serious.
These are very, very real threats, and are going to have a devastating impact on our economy and, quite frankly, our way of life. Trump has absolutely no respect for the rule of law or, common decency with respect to the rights and interests of all people, particularly Indigenous peoples.
Professor Antweiler says Trump's plan to launch an external revenue service could hit some serious roadblocks.
Now, if that includes Canada and Mexico, of course, it would be an abrogation of our existing free trade agreement. There's just no other way to put this. It's he's ripping up an agreement he has signed himself, which is raising the question, how good is his word to anything?
Premier Eby says leaders from across Canada have discussed strategies to combat the threat of these tariffs.
The world, these tariffs are proposed not just against Canada, but against countries around the world. We will partner with those countries and work with them to respond and also to deepen our relationships with them. We have trade relationships, strong trade relationships across the Pacific with many different countries, and this is an opportunity for us to deepen and strengthen those relationships and reduce our dependence on the United States.
We have a lot of allies that will be part of this battle. It's going to be epic in proportion, but I think at the end of the day it'll be defining.
Financial forecasters say Canada will lose billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs from the tariffs. President Trump has announced that these tariffs will begin on February the 1st, 2025. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
We're always looking for your feedback or story ideas. Here's how you can continue the conversation with us. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. And to read and watch our stories, you can go to www.aptnnews.ca. You can also find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. A documentary on residential schools has just received an Oscar nod. We'll tell you more when we come back. Welcome back. A warning to our viewers on this next story. Some of the content here may be difficult to hear. Imagine being in pain so severe you can't even hold your newborn, and your concerns are dismissed by healthcare professionals as overreacting. That's what an Indigenous mother said happened to her after giving birth. Her story is shedding light on an issue researchers at the University of Windsor call medical gaslighting. CTV's Sanjay Maru has more.
Every time Monica Bull visits the doctor, she's reminded of the difficult experience she went through after delivering her daughter 5 years ago via C-section.
I remember just being in a lot of pain, and I couldn't even, not even enough to hold my daughter.
Bull says her severe abdominal pain was dismissed by her nurse as nothing more than an overdramatic patient experiencing standard postpartum discomfort. 2 days after giving birth, she was discharged from the hospital.
As soon as I sat in that wheelchair, I felt something pop in my abdomen, and then I screamed, and then she yelled at me and she's like, "Stop screaming."
Unable to sleep that night, Bull went to the ER where she learned the reason for her severe pain.
I was bleeding internally, and it was creating this huge blood clot, and it was affecting it was touching all of my nerves. It was called a hematoma. The hematoma became 7 inches long and 2 inches thick of just internal bleeding.
I think almost any woman you talk to has had some sort of experience like this, whether it's something major or something minor.
It's called medical gaslighting when patient symptoms are dismissed, leading to missed diagnoses and delayed care that can worsen medical conditions. The phenomenon is at the center of a University of Windsor study coordinated by Marissa Rakes.
It goes back to that bias and perspective of women being dramatic and overly emotional and seeking attention and complaining more.
Rakes says these experiences often make women reluctant to seek medical help, putting their health in danger. For Bull, she's instead decided to use her experience in 2020 as a lesson on how to better navigate the healthcare system.
I try to get to know the terms now of medical terms, to go in okay, this is what I'm feeling, this is what's going on, and so that they don't think that I'm faking my illness or faking what's going on with me.
As for the study team, they hope their work encourages doctors to listen to patients more carefully and treat them with greater empathy.
If we can do one thing, it's, make women feel like they're not alone.
Sanjay Maru, CTV News.
A documentary that explores the devastating legacy of residential schools in Canada has been nominated for an Academy Award. The Oscar nominations were announced on Thursday, and Sugarcan is among the 5 nominees for Best Documentary Feature. The documentary is an investigation into the horrors inflicted on the children of the St. Joseph's Mission Residential School in British Columbia, including co-director Julian Brave Noisecat's family and his father's survival. Noisecat and co-director Emily Cassie said they were overjoyed and filled with gratitude for the acknowledgement from the Academy. They acknowledged the courage and fortitude of the participants and the thousands of survivors of Indian residential and boarding schools across North America, as well as the generations of families who continue to suffer their harms. The Oscar winners will be announced at a ceremony in Hollywood on March 2nd. We now want to recap this week's 3 web poll questions. Over on our website, we ask, should children sing God Save the King in schools? Your answers are, I support it, indifferent, I do not support it, or unsure. Our second web question we ask is, would tightening the Canada-US border negatively impact Indigenous communities? Your choices are yes, no, or unsure. And our third question, are you concerned about US tariffs on Canada's economy? You can choose very concerned, somewhat concerned, not concerned, or unsure. Head over to our website at www.aptnnews.ca to have your say. Our reporter Sierra Bettins joins us in studio next to talk about our new APTN In Focus podcast. We're back in less than 3 minutes. Stay with us. Starting on the east, Charlottetown -8, Halifax sunny and -3. The Grand River -17, Nain -14. Gaspé -8, St. Jovite -13. Ottawa -12, Sarnia -7. Big Trout Lake -18, Wawa -15. -13 in Churchill, Thompson -9. Dauphin -2, Barons River -9. Estevan -4, Saskatoon partly cloudy and -5. Stony Rapids at -14, Buffalo Narrows sunny and -8. -2 in Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray 1. -3 in Red Deer, 0 in Edmonton. 0 in Penticton, Kamloops 2. 3 in Fort Nelson, Smithers -1. 2 in Old Crow, Watson Lake -11. -7 in Yellowknife, Wrigley -11. Inuvik 2, Pawlatuck -3. Cambridge Bay -31, Baker Lake -28. And Arctic Bay 27, -27, Agulik -27 as well. APTN In Focus is back, now in podcast form. Over the years, APTN In Focus gave an extended look into stories that needed to be put in focus by panelists and special guests who joined our host in studio. Now, our Winnipeg reporter, Sierra Bettins, will be changing hats and hosting that podcast that will bring you an extended look into stories that are making waves across Turtle Island. Here's a preview of the first episode and our interview with Sierra Bettins.
I'm Sierra Bettins. Welcome to APTN News in Focus. In this week's episode, we're putting the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in focus. To the Gwich'in in Alaska, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is known as Ijikwatsan Gwandai Godlit, meaning the sacred place where life begins.
Our stories as Gwich'in nations have been long told that we never go to this area, and it's defined as a sacred place because that's where life begins. You know, we don't want the life to end there. We want the life to continue to begin and thrive there. And that's of the animals, the birds, and the waterfowl that occupy that area.
Sierra, thanks so much for joining us in studio. My first question is, can you tell us the idea about bringing APTN In Focus and turning it into a podcast?
Yeah, so some of our viewers might remember the name In Focus from our long-standing TV program. So now the idea is we're reviving it as a podcast. And so it's really, keeping the spirit of the original In Focus TV program and bringing in experts, bringing in reporters to give our viewers a bit more of an in-depth look at the stories that we've been sharing in the newscast.
And Sierra, how do you feel about the podcast and how do you think it'll capture the stories that are featured on APTN News?
Yeah, so we're really focusing on these developing stories. So there's stories that are making headlines, but they're also evolving, and our reporters are continuing to follow them. So oftentimes these stories are, very complex, and our reporters only really get a few minutes to share them on the newscast. And so with this, we can bring in an expert to give a bit more context, or we can bring in a reporter to share, what they've gathered in the field and what they've heard from people that are most impacted by these stories. And then, so the idea is, in turn, that our viewers tune into APTN National News with a much more nuanced understanding of these stories and, hopefully feel a bit more connected to the stories.
And Sierra, can you talk about some of the ideas and topics for the first episodes? What are listeners going to expect?
Yeah, so our first episode is on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So for people that aren't familiar, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is a 19.6 million acre refuge in Alaska. And it holds a lot of cultural significance to the Gwich'in in Alaska. But with Trump's return to power, there's heightened concerns about his plans to open it up to oil and gas drilling. So our reporter, Sarah Connors, has been following the story really closely over the past couple months. So we brought her in on the podcast to give viewers a bit more background and, talk about what's at stake, what she's been hearing from Indigenous communities that are affected by these issues. So super excited for that to come out. And yeah, we also have an episode on organized crime with our reporter Kenneth Jackson coming out. And so yeah, cannot wait for our viewers to hear about that.
Definitely creating more value for our viewers, for our listeners, and creating this more content. And you have much more time, and that's important, more time to cover it compared to what we do here, where we only have half an hour for our show.
Yeah, absolutely. That's totally the idea behind it. And yeah, just so our viewers, can understand and work through and navigate these really complex issues and feel, a lot more connected to the stories that we tell.
And finally, when does the first episode drop and where can everyone listen?
Yeah, so the first episode actually just dropped on Thursday. It's available on all major streaming platforms. So wherever you get your podcasts, you can also listen to it on aptnnews.ca/podcasts. And I also just wanted to give a shout out to our producers, Mark Blackburn, Charmaine Straker, our editor, Jesse Andrusko. They've all been doing amazing work to make this podcast a reality.
That's our reporter, Sarah Bettins, who is the host of APTN In Focus and our new podcast there. Thank you, Sarah, for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Kristen.
And that's your daytime newscast for this Friday, January 24th. Where the heck did the month go? Dennis Ward is back for your evening newscast with more stories. Make sure to join us then. From all of us at APTN National News, Miigwech, Masicho, Hai Hai, Juana, thank you for watching. We'll see you again. Ekse.